All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining and watching our webinar today. Today we have a wonderful collaboration thanks to Karen Flowers and the LELC community with ASIS. Women in Security is doing these collabs all year long with the different communities, but this is our first and wonderful one, I will say, about how to transition from the public sector to the private sector. And not only a perspective on what worked and what didn't work, but also when, timing, right? What did you pay attention to when you originally started going out to the job search? What did you pay attention to a year ahead of time? And then what did you pay attention to, or what worked once you got there and you got into that private sector job, and how hard it was and such and such. So we're going to focus on that today. I'm going to let Karen explain a little bit about the LELC community and introduce our wonderful speakers. And go ahead, take it away, Karen.
Thanks, Brittany. Hi, I'm Karen Flowers, and I am the Secretary of the Law Enforcement Liaison Committee, LELC, and ASIS. And I'm a new member of the board there, and it's a very interesting experience. Being a relatively new member of ASIS, to kind of be more engaged, more out front. And I think that's what LELC is trying to do itself. We are trying to create outreach into other communities, to build awareness of the law enforcement community and how valuable that can be in your next career. Networking is huge. So also know, if you're not already a member of ASIS, please join. And when you join, you don't have to be pigeonholed into one community. You can join as many communities as you want. So I'm here to recruit all of us women. We don't have that many in law enforcement liaison committee, which is shocking to me. And I want to change that. So I really wanted to join up with Women in Security, which I'm also a member of. And bring the two together, let's be force multipliers for each other and help a girl out.
Very good.
I currently work for the Director of Global Security and Asset Protection at the Coca-Cola Company. I'm based here in Atlanta, Georgia. And prior to that, I was with the Drug Enforcement Administration for 28 years. And I was a special agent in charge of 3 field divisions in the U.S.
Wonderful. Well, like I said, we have quite the lineup today. Thank you, Karen. Susan, let's go ahead and start with you. Can you introduce yourself quickly, what you did in public world and what you're doing currently in private world? Can you give us that little background history on yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Susan Gibson, and I started back in 1993 as a police officer in South Carolina. I'm really proud of that time. And then I transitioned to the Drug Enforcement Administration, and that's where I had the opportunity to meet and work with Karen Flowers. Very honored about that. And I went through the ranks, worked mostly in New York City. I did time in Office of Professional Responsibility and the Diversion Control Division, ultimately ending up in New Jersey as a special agent in charge upon the completion of my career with DEA. And now I am so honored to be part of Kenvue, which is the consumer health company that is now new for all the Johnson & Johnson products. I'm the Director of Global Security here, and it's really a great opportunity. So I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. And if I remember correctly, you have an unlimited supply of Band-Aids.
Yes, I have Tylenol, unlimited supply of Band-Aids. Very proud of the products that they produce here.
Wonderful.
It's fun to finally be part of a company where you can give out free samples, Sue.
Well, I buy them, but I buy them and give them to my friends and family. And but you know what? It's everyday health that we take for granted. So it's really a great product line that I'm proud to be a part of.
And full of stocking stuffers as well. I love it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Miss Janelle, would you please do us the honor of introducing yourself?
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm Janelle Miller. I did 22 years, served 22 years in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Before I started with the FBI, I was a Baltimore police officer and rose through the ranks in the FBI. And before I retired, I was a senior executive and the acting special agent in charge of the Albany field office. And I was also a New York agent, unfortunately during 9/11, and worked overseas for 3 years in Pakistan and Bosnia. From there, I retired and went to the private sector, worked for the National Football League as their international security director, and then went to Time and was the director of global security, where I built their security program. And now I'm over at Varsity Spirit building their security program. I'm the director of event security for them. Happy to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'll kick this off just quickly with one question for Susan, for you. So when did you decide, like how many years prior to you going into the private sector did you decide you wanted to? And like, what was the kicker when you said, hey, now's the time, or I'm going to leave in 12 months from now? What was that thought process you went through just before you left?
Well, you had to start off with a tough one, didn't you? I started thinking about what my next move would be about a year prior to me getting this job. As we all know, getting jobs outside of government, and to include government jobs, takes a long time. And I think the first step of acknowledging is to make sure that at least your resume is up to date in case something comes across your path. But I think at every time in your career, you have to take a summary and a hard look at where you're at and where you want to go in that position. And, what's in front of you and where you can go and what's a possibility. I did love Jersey. I loved living in New Jersey. And I don't know if I was ready to move back to Washington, D.C. So I just definitely wanted to make sure that all options were available. And that's what basically made me start looking.
Definitely. So living had to do with that, which is good. That I sometimes what I think what gets overwashed is that, where we live and where we want to be is a significant game player in that, right?
Yes. And I think financially too. I mean, you got to look at, am I going to be making any more money with the government? Is it time to expand my portfolio? And if you have, elderly parents that you need to take care of and they become a big priority, that is something that plays into it too. Absolutely.
Janelle, you mentioned something when we were just chatting about resumes and preparing that for that transition. What was the advice that you gave on that?
So I always advise people because we need to speak private speak as opposed to the public speak. When we work at the federal government, we have our own lingo, so to speak, and it does not translate into the private sector. So it's important that I always advise people to hire somebody that understands the public or that understands the private sector and can make your resume look and distinguishable from the public sector. So that's the first thing, and then can build your LinkedIn profile. Again, that is, it translates into the private sector, so that because people don't really understand, arrests, they watch too many TV programs that think, that this is the way, law enforcement is, when in reality, that is not the case at all. So it's important that you've hired somebody and not copied somebody else's resume that's translatable to your skill set.
Yep.
And get diversified too, along with what Janelle was saying. Make sure that you're going through your career and you get diversified, that you just don't stay in enforcement, because that's what pops out on a resume the most, is your diversification. Definitely.
Yeah. And so much so, I think you guys mentioned it too previously, is that it's not just about the job, it's about the community service, how you're helping that. I mean, those are things to add. I feel like with ChatGPT and some of the AI tools out there, it's almost free now to have somebody else from an outside perspective rewrite your resume and rewrite your LinkedIn profile. And it really gives those soft skills. And I think that was one thing that we touched on before, is how important soft skills are versus hard skills are, right? It's great that we have the certifications. It's great that we have the longevity. It's great that we have the experience. But Janelle's point is, and this is something, again, you said I'm going to pull on, is that it's great that you've done all these particular investigations, but really in the private sector, they're interested that you know how to do one, right? It's the how that you've learned the experience level of the doing it, not necessarily that you have all these big titles or investigations on your laundry list of expertise.
Well, and I think too, one of the important thing is, in the private sector, it's very similar to the public sector in this sense, is that you're a team member. right? Nobody does anything alone in the public sector. You're certainly not going to do that in the private sector. So on your resume, you need to explain that you're a team player. You can do change management. You can do whatever type of management. You can manage money, so a budget, people. And if you didn't do that, then work with the person that's going to write your resume on those certain verbiage that will make you stand out in the private sector. But it definitely, on any of the jobs that I've had, and I recommend to folks about when they come out, is you've got to show, and your resume is the first thing that gets you in the door. So you do the rest after that. So it has to show that you can be a team member and that you can be collaborative with folks, and can do that transition.
Perfect. Susan, how did you go ahead? Nope.
No, also too, I think in the resume or the interview world too, especially at our level, because we did get to senior executive staff, you almost have to portray yourself as a chief executive officer or a chief operating officer, because you handled budgets, you handled building management, you handled internal investigations. And if you look at that from a high level, you really bring a lot of skill sets to the table. Just as federal workers, though, sometimes we don't give ourselves that credit, but view yourself as a COO of your location, and you're going to be shocked about how much that you can put down that you oversaw, to include major budgets.
Yep. You manage people, places, and things, and the security of. Yes.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Karen, go ahead.
I think it's also important that it's not only your resume that's important, it's also the research that you do on the company that you're going to want to join. I've had the honor of being in interviews here at Coca-Cola, and you can tell the candidates in the interview who have done research on the Coca-Cola company and those who haven't. And I can tell you, as somebody in the interview process, people who've taken the time to do some basic research shine, because at least they cared to go and look at a website,
right,
and to throw some random quote or get a good question out of it, show that they are aware of what Coca-Cola does.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, and I think it's important that once you have that resume, keep adding to it. It's a living document.
Yep.
Keep going back to it, tweaking it. It's not a one and done kind of thing. And as you get more exposure and network, you're going to pick up new things and new buzzwords that you're going to want to incorporate to keep your resume alive and updated. Because the one thing I've learned coming from private to public is have to go back, because it's not like government work. That job is not guaranteed. I've been through 2 restructures already in 3.5 years. So it's not a permanent job. So always be prepared to go on to the next thing. So that's another reason why having that resume up to date and ready to go, and that LinkedIn profile, so that you can adapt. Because what employers are looking for is getting along well with others, like kindergarten. Get along well with others and be adaptable. Be able to be flexible and agile. So do that same thing for yourself. And please invest in yourself. Hire somebody to help you write your resume, add your LinkedIn profile.
Yep.
Agree. 100%.
And once they've got it going, you can then start to manipulate it, to update it and keep it current. It's worth the money.
But sometimes that outside perspective for what you think is like expensive is really not. It's cheap on the dollar to have somebody else look at all this from the outside perspective. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Worth every penny.
Wonderful. So let's talk about networking. So, and I'm just going to pick on Janelle quickly first. So networking. So how did you go about when you said, okay, I'm going to leave, right? Or it's time, or I'm going to retire, right? Or because I think you said 20 years in federal world was kind of the marker there generally. When you said that, how did you go about networking? What worked? What didn't?
So I started talking to retired agents and said, just got a broad perspective of what they've done, and had a few conversations with, just a few conversations with some people I knew about how do you transition, and they kind of give me some pointers. And I started my resume working with somebody to start my resume almost a year in advance. And just so I knew it would be ready by the time, I retired. I think the other thing is networking is super important. But like I said to you offline was that's not the only thing. I was told before I retired that the only way you can get a job is networking. That's actually not true. It's important for sure. But I got my job through LinkedIn. And all my jobs actually through LinkedIn. So it was not done through network. That doesn't say that it's not important, but you are your resume, right? Your skill set should be on your resume. That gets you through the door. So it's important that you have all the tools in the toolbox. Don't limit yourself. You'd be surprised when people say, you won't get a job through LinkedIn, so don't apply. That's what I was told. I did it anyway. And I ended up getting the National Football League job. So it is important that, you can stand out and, don't limit yourself as to how you can find a job.
Wonderful. Susan, how about you? Networking. What worked? What didn't? When did you start?
I mean, networking is always a good tool, and it's always good to have confidants to talk to. Karen was one of my confidants because it is a tricky area when you're thinking about leaving the federal government, that you really have to be careful as to who you talk to, and because it's a private decision, and it's a sensitive decision. It's something that you're not coming to lightly. It's something that you dedicated your life to. So I think having some confidants that you could talk to that are out in the public sector, and definitely the corporate sector, and getting their opinion and having their guidance, and because it's a whole different way of thinking. Networking is very important, and building those contacts are very important too once you get the job. But before you get the job, interviewing, you really need to take it seriously. And if you're not a good speaker, if you're concerned about interviewing, go get instruction and go meet with people and go sit down with that best friend that you can be yourself in front of and get critiqued. One of my dearest friends, she's a public information officer for DEA, and she helped me tremendously as far as interviewing and what to say in public, even when I was on the job, press conferences and everything else like that. I mean, you do need those skills to make sure that you present yourself in the way that you want to be seen. That's very, very important. Very important.
Did your network help you get your job outside?
Yes. But I also applied for the job on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Just like Janelle. LinkedIn and I got several interviews off of LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And also to apply for a decent amount of them, because the more interviews that you get under your belt, the more experience you get. So,
yes,
and obviously you want to do very well in each one of them, but you take away experience, and so then when the next one comes around, it doesn't feel so foreign to you. So because remember, we're interviewing for the first time after 20 plus years of not looking for a job. So
right.
It's a whole new venture, and it's a whole new way of thinking, because we were so used to what we had. So for me, it was something that I definitely had.
Practice does make perfect in the interview process. I'll say that.
Absolutely.
The more you have, the better it is.
Yeah. But LinkedIn, just like Janelle, really helped me tremendously.
Okay. What did you guys start applying for? What was the job title you started applying for when you first came out? I know you had lots of years, right? So you had 20 plus years, but at the same time, like, what kind of jobs were attractive to you?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because right, we don't know.
Variety
and
here.
So when this is where your contacts kind of like, what is actually out there. And so, right. So it looks at, again, if you're a senior executive versus, another position in the public sector, director of global security, security services, and really just kind of play around in LinkedIn, right? And kind of, I call it the Google of LinkedIn, and see what pops up and say, okay, like I knew I did not want to be a fraud examiner. I didn't work white collar. I would not like that. But for people that might be in the banking industry, in the public sector, that may be something working for banks and being fraud. So then you would do fraud investigator or some other terminology like that, and really kind of see, what's there. The one thing I would say is when you do that, and I caution women because they're worse on this than men, you are never going to have all the skill sets that are listed on that posting.
I know what you're going to
The
say.
posting is what, 10 pages long?
Yeah.
So you won't get the job if you don't apply for it. So look at the posting and then apply, because women tend to not apply because they don't have all that. You will never have all of it.
Yeah.
So get yourself in the door, get yourself an interview, and then figure out how you're going to answer the question. If you don't know about cybersecurity, how you're going to answer that, but don't worry about that at the beginning. So that's the advice I give to people is you won't get the job if you don't apply.
There you go.
It's true. Yeah.
Go ahead, Susan. Is anything to add there?
No, she's absolutely right, Janelle. I mean, you're hitting all the points. Sometimes women, we don't believe in ourselves as much as a man sometimes. And you looked at all the qualities and or what their qualifications are. And you're like, oh my God, I don't know if I can. But no, you can. I mean, that's where you got to look at yourself, and you look at yourself as a chief operating officer, especially if you're at the executive level, because you do bring out all those qualities to the table. You may have to learn some, but it's really not about the learning. It's about the person that you hire to be serious about learning something new.
Right.
So I don't look at anything as like, oh my God, I don't know that. It's like, oh, I'm excited to learn it, and I will learn it.
Right.
And you got to believe in yourself. And in fact, I gave a little bit of a speech for women in federal law enforcement. And I think that's the biggest thing that's holding us back is sometimes we don't believe in ourselves, and that we're really critical of ourselves, and not only getting the criticism from the outside world, but we're also critical of ourselves all the time. And we got to stop that. We got to move forward, and you just believe in yourself. And like Janelle says, you put in, and then you interview, and then you go from there. Absolutely.
Let the world turn you down, but at least one of them is going to say yes. So
yeah,
I love that. Karen, anything else to add there before we wrap it up? I got
No,
one more. I got one more
absolutely.
question.
Great discussions. So
Yeah.
keep it rolling, ladies.
No, so, and this is kind of an interesting thought of like, where do you see the next, let's say, generation of security leaders coming from public to private? Is there any trends you're seeing from whether it's military coming into executive protection, or it's, FBI, DEA coming into, security manager or senior manager roles? Is there any trends you guys are seeing from your friends and your network from public to private? Are you seeing anybody coming into like certain sectors, whether they're going majority into financial sector or financial services or things?
Well, I know from like the Secret Service, it makes sense that they go into executive protection because that's what they do in public. And I've worked with a lot of them because when I do event security and stuff, sometimes we have hire clients that have executive protection, and most of them are prior Secret Service. And they do that well. And again, at least from the FBI perspective, it depends on what they did. I see a lot of the lawyers go to law firms. The accountants were agents, they go to banks. I work national security, so global security. And so there are some trends in that, but if you want to maybe go work for a bank and you didn't do that in that career, go get certified in, as a bank, as a fraud examiner. And there's tools, again, that you can use to increase your chances of getting a position you like. But I would also caution that you do want to, I think one of the big mistakes I see that agents make is not understanding, that, again, you are your skill set. And when you get in an interview, they ask, why are you retiring? And I hope that the answer isn't, well, because I'm just done. And, they are very negative. It's because you want the opportunity to move to, the outside world, so to speak, and that it's not a retirement job. It's your second career. Because there is a little skepticism of people coming out of the public sector that you're going to be lazy in that it's your retirement. It is your second career. It is not your retirement or a third career, whatever it may be, because you may have been in the military first, then went to law enforcement, and then so it's good to say those things, and so that you're not knocked out and they see you as, oh, this is going to be a retirement job.
Right.
That can hurt you.
That's a very good point. Excellent thing to say and not say. Wonderful. Susan, anything else to add there?
Wow. I think Karen can back me up on this. I think when we started in DEA, a lot of the corporate jobs and the retirement jobs really went to FBI, Secret Service. They definitely had a strong hold on it.
Mhm.
And I think what the trend is now, it doesn't matter what federal agency you work for. It's a skill set that you got to focus on. That FBI, you can bring different skill sets, but DEA, just because we only focused on drugs does not mean that we don't have the skill sets to transition into the retirement world. And Janelle is absolutely right. I mean, I look at this as my whole new second chapter. I am working harder than I did in the beginning because, you know, it's all new and, but it's a challenge. And I think you definitely have to make sure that whoever you work for, the company that you want to work for, understands that this is not something you're taking lightly. This is your second career. And I think those in law enforcement, we're always very we don't jump to different careers very, very often. So when we do that transition, we do take it seriously. And I think the transition for corporate America to understand what law enforcement, to include police officers, federal agents, however you want to define yourself, what we bring to the table. Right. And it's a security mindset. It's procedures. It's understanding policies, and it's understanding safety, and being able to understand what the public needs, because we interact with them all the time. So that's a huge skill set that law enforcement in general has. Right. And it can transition. And don't think just because law enforcement career is maybe ending and it may not be where you want to be when you leave. Understand there's people out there, there's jobs out there that are going to appreciate you and what you bring to the table.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said, ladies. Karen, anything else to add before we wrap it up?
Just as far as trends, one of the things I'm seeing like Coca-Cola is, cybersecurity, things involving, AI, these type of things, these new tools that are going to be available. I think those are things that companies are looking to, develop for their own capacity for doing that. And I think, this big bad world that we're in, they're always going to have that kind of threat from cyber attack, whether from our physical structures, our the bank accounts, our secret formula. All these things are things that we're going to have to stuff around.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see in this digital ecosystem as it grows and flourishes that we need to have more protection around that. And it's interesting when I think of security, I've thought, or at least talked about it in the past with others, is it really is people, places, and things, right? But that includes software, right? That's that digital world is also included underneath that, and the CSO or CISO roles. And it's interesting because they say, we did a recent case study that said, when you're hiring, for instance, to Janelle's point, maybe you don't check every single box and that's fine, but you're hiring for 80% people management and you're hiring for 20% security management, because you can teach security things. However, people management, people skills and business acumen are really what these leaders want, right? They can teach the nitty-gritty details. They can go get experts to give advice or consultation on a very specific thing, but they need the people management, the vendor management, the business acumen to sit there in that role and actually lead. And so that was interesting. We just did a case study on that from a job description perspective, and it was good full circle. But well, thank you, ladies. I can't say this is amazing. Our first LELC Women in Security Collab webinar, thanks to Miss Karen Flowers. Janelle, it was great to see you. Miss Susan Gibson, please connect with these ladies on LinkedIn. Not only are they wealths of knowledge in the security industry, but they're also a wealth of knowledge in your ASIS community. And so plug and pull on them. I'm sure they're more than willing to hear from you and answer any questions you have about transitioning. But thank you again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.